So just a reminder, and the recordings will be at that PBIS-CalTAC website under the folder for today. Give it a couple of days and the recording will be up there.
And if you notice the icon that says Be Positive, you can get that off of PBIS.org, the National Center website. This is the brand new app that helps us as adults to remind ourselves of many different things, like behavior-specific praise, or in Barbara's case, to record this webinar. So check it out. It's a great free app.
We're also, and that app is good for whether you've got Apple or whether you're on a PC. So there's both, or Android. So the objectives for today is we're really going to review the foundations for creating routines and procedures, and really specifically talk about high school, and review the 8 powerful elements that you'll find in your high school matrix, how much you can get out of using that classroom matrix. And we're going to make connections during the day and ask you to make connections to these foundations about how you use them in your distance learning, whether that be on Zoom, whatever platform you're using. Not all kids have access to computers, so I know we're developing other ways to do distance learning as well.
And this is really going to be interactive. So we encourage you, if you haven't downloaded the handout that has all this information, so please don't take notes, because there's more information on the handouts than what we're going to tell you. And it goes sequentially with the hour that we have with you. What we have at the last page is a sample template of a classroom matrix. But what we would encourage you to do right now, if you don't have that sample template in front of you, is to get a piece of paper and pencil, because we're going to start drawing and adding to the matrix. That's what makes this particular hour with you interactive. We're going to ask you specifically to write things down in certain boxes. So it's going to be, I think, a fun afternoon.
And it'll really be nice because we can share the context of each of our different classrooms, very different across the state of California. And we actually have people joining us on these webinars across the nation. So it's really helpful to find the different contexts that we're working with in high schools. We have our expectations, of course. We want to be respectful, be safe, and be responsible. We're using the chat box for being respectful. We're staying at home and keeping our physical distance, yet we're connecting with each other still. And we're going to be responsible because we're going to be using the breakout room, and we'll go over the directions there. I think most of us are starting to get used to the breakout room, how you'll be able to unmute, talk to the people, join the room when you get asked. Don't just stay hanging out in the main room. Go ahead and join the room and have a fun conversation. As normal, we always try to follow our roadmap, and that's what our tiered fidelity inventory does for us. It's a roadmap that will help us stay true to what the evidence-based practice is, while allowing us to contextualize it to our own individual classrooms. So just a reminder, a quote from George, where he lets us know that the key to successful classroom management is the prevention of problems before they happen. It's really not about not knowing how to deal with the problems after they've begun. So that is a lot of what our classroom matrix does for us, is help us prepare. So in that classroom procedures, a 1.8 on the tiered fidelity inventory, we're really going to delve into how you connect your classroom routines to those school-wide expectations, how you develop routines in your classroom. We want to talk about how you give acknowledgments, all the prevention pieces, and then what is your in-class continuum of consequences. So when you do have to respond after they've begun, what would be a way that will de-escalate things instead of end up being where we're escalating the situation. We also want to make sure that you know that in the tiered fidelity inventory, there is a crosswalk, and you can find that on that URL that's on the bottom of the page there. And again, you'll have access to this PowerPoint, so you don't need to worry about copying it down now. But it is where we've done a high school elaboration of the TFI. So it lets you know at each TFI element, how different does that look like in high school? What does that mean about high school? The biggest difference on the classroom procedures is it really is about genuine, active participation by students. So they are being seen as developing their own self-advocacy. They knew how to take their own, being responsible for their own academic learning. How are they actively involved in developing the routines in the matrix? And so we'll go into that as we go through today. I'm laughing because I forget that I have to click the button to let the butterfly do something. So I think, oh no, it's not working yet, but it's still working. In the high school elaborations, there is an emphasis on getting to that 4-to-1 positive to negative teacher statements. And actually, I would embellish on that and say statements in the classroom, because in high school, all those statements don't have to be made by the teacher. That's something where, again, we're helping the kids be part of the managers there. We want to make sure that our praise statements, our acknowledgement statements are appropriate. Again, we had a previous webinar that was on how you give specific performance feedback, how you do that with high school kids. And I think that one was, I wrote it down so I wouldn't forget. It was on May 6th. So if you go back and you didn't see that one high school one, you might want to pick it up about how to do that in a way that builds the students' ownership of that behavior. Then also about how to give error corrections to address misbehaviors. What does active supervision look like in high school, and providing choice and opportunities to respond. And that one you really found on May 13th. We did one, and it wasn't specific to high school, but it's general. It meant all the way through high school. We gave both types of examples. So if you didn't see it, you might want to check in on that May 13th webinar, where you'll see how what are the different methods for giving choice, and how do you increase opportunities to respond. And there's good conversation and dialogue about how we do that virtually. So again, that's the big connection here, is how do we take what we know works to the virtual classroom.
One little thing to consider is the idea that we are doing this distance learning right now, and we know that we do crave that personal connection. So maybe when you go back in the fall, you might want to consider with your peers that you really like, of course, to talk about learning walks. Learning walks are just a really nice way for us to learn from each other, because we are the experts. If we're in our classroom, we're using evidence-based classroom tools, and maybe there are some things that we're doing that we would want to share with our peers, and vice versa. We can learn from each other. So on the handout, there's actually 3 areas that we know about for prevention practices that are evidence-based. There's routines and procedures, which are foundations. There's the acknowledgements, which are their prevention practices. And then, of course, there are the consequences that are response practices. We are only focusing today on routines and procedures, the foundation of classroom management. So think about what you do already. If you have a classroom teaching matrix, have you aligned it with your school-wide expectations? And are the social skills that you teach observable, measurable, positively stated, succinct, and in age-appropriate language? And do you use that language from the matrix for your prompts? And do your students use that language to prompt other people? Do you also use it in your acknowledgement system? Because maybe some of you just have a really great system of how you operate with your routines, and we want to share that with our peers. It's important to think about the alignment of the matrix with social emotional learning, and how are we using that matrix to create academic self-managers, having our kids be able to navigate and know what social skills to use to be successful. Are we explicitly teaching those routines? And do we provide the opportunity to practice and build fluency so we can generalize those social skills and adapt to new environments? So this is just a teaser. We're not going through the training, but you're going to see that the 8 powerful pieces of the matrix might flow within this.
And just a thought here, that as you're looking at these, I was looking at the learning walks in the handout. A good conversation with your colleagues now is about how are you doing these virtually. We know that behavior is contextual. So what you learned in your classroom, what you've done in your classroom, you can carry over, but you're going to have to specifically make it contextual to your new environment in your virtual learning or your distance learning. So good conversation, even if you're not back at school yet, is how are you doing this? And these will be the learning walks is a good guideline for those conversations.
So let's get started with the power of the high school classroom matrix. Next slide.
I'm going up. The butterfly has
the butterfly.
I'm flying the butterfly around.
So here are the 8 areas that we're going to cover. Oh, well, before we cover, there's one, our magical wizard, we say, is Dr. Horner, the co-founder of the National Center on PBIS. And he says, if you go back, Barb, he says that it's not going to work if you don't engage our students in the process. It doesn't work in high school in particular without student engagement. So never forget that. This isn't about us. It's about including doing things with our students. Thanks, Barb. Now you can click the slide and the butterfly can fly by.
Okay.
So the 8 steps that we're going to be talking about, you saw that, that'll make it magical. We're going to go through those 8 steps. So you did that slide, will be okay. It's all right, Barb. Yeah. We're going to frame, we're going to do it together. We're going to instruct, we're going to acknowledge, we're going to use it as a prompting tool. We're going to use it as a responding tool. We're going to develop self-managers, and we're going to align it with other initiatives. So this is the matrix, and we should all be familiar with what your routines are and how you're going to teach them. We align it with our school-wide expectations. So the Wilson Way is just a really nice example. Be responsible, be respectful, and be safe. There are general classroom rules that we may have as agreements across our school, our high school, that we're going to be using, but we may have our own routines that we've created with our students, like entering the classroom, how to transition in small group work, because that's important. We also have a webinar that we've talked about creating in a virtual classroom, because those routines might look totally different than that physical classroom environment. So this is just an example of what we're talking about today and how we're going to make it powerful.
I believe that webinar was on April 13th. Again, not high school specific, but it included high school examples. And where we talked about, you've got your classroom matrix that you may already have developed or in the process of developing, build off of that. Because now it's like, how do you enter the chat room? How do you come online the first time? So think about those same routines that you have now that you've gone virtual.
Just keep going, Barb. Next slide. So we're just going to have a little interaction right now. You can put information in the chat box if you'd like, or you could be using this to draw your matrix. So we're just going to choose one school-wide expectation. And if your school doesn't have expectations right now, be thinking of a value that you would want to have your students learn and practice in your classroom. So you're going to write that in the upper left-hand box. And then above that is a routine or procedure that you are using right now in that virtual classroom, or one that you use in your physical classroom. So you're going to personalize or individualize this matrix right now. So that's the only directions, just 2 things to write down, or if you'd like, just put them in the chat box.
And you've got that final page of your handout to use. There's a blank matrix there where you can take that first line and write down one of your behavioral expectations. So in my high schools, we had integrity, honor self and others, and social responsibility. So I would have just picked integrity and then decided on one of my routines, entering the classroom, and then be thinking about what we would write in there.
I'm typing in the chat box. Okay, sorry. I'm back now.
Everybody else is typing too. Put your responses in the chat box, put them on your sheet of paper. This is how we communicate with each other.
And as you're doing that, I'm going to move on because we really don't have that much time with you, and we love talking, and so we have to stop and let you have this opportunity to talk and engage with each other. So the very first thing that we need to address to make this magical, to make this powerful, is that we have to frame what we're really doing. Why are we having a classroom matrix? Our students need to know that. And as educators, we know that there's always an anticipatory set. We set kids up. Why are we doing what we're doing? So create a context of why you are doing a classroom matrix. Have your students commit Tell them the purpose of it, the outcome, the agreement, what you're going to all use it for and how you're going to use it. And the most important thing is make that connection to their life skills. How will this support them?
And I think at working across all grade levels, doing this section with the high schools is the most powerful of all developmental levels, because it has so much more immediate meaning to the students about why do we want to do this? Why do we need to learn how to do this together? So that was step number 1 out of our 8. Now looking at step number 2, this is the idea of doing it together, where we really want to make sure that we're involving the students in defining those classroom routines. So again, if you've already got yours in the classroom, pull it up, refresh everybody's memory, and then say, but now, what is this going to look different? How does this look different with what we're doing now? And then you want to make sure that whatever you put inside those boxes is observable, that they're measurable, that they're positively stated, that it's very understandable. And this is where I think doing it with the kids is really helpful, because you'll be using their language, not necessarily my language, which is a couple of generations away from them. So we really want to make sure that we're including their language. I can see many of you, and a lot of you are a lot closer to their age than I am. So you'll understand the need for that. And then always applicable, something that, yeah, this is universal. This is something they want to make sure that we all have agreement on, that we need to do it together. So we're going to have the opportunity again to write down on our matrix one of your school-wide expectations.
Which you've already done.
Oh, you've already done that. You're right. And then you've already added your 1 classroom procedure. So whatever procedure you put on your sheet, now we want you to include the social skill. So what's 1, no more than 2, observable skills would you have? What would you see that was observable, that is measurable, that is explicit, that is positive, that is inclusive, all those things we just talked about? What would you see and hear for integrity in that classroom routine of entering the classroom, whatever it was that you chose? So take a minute, write that on your matrix. It's the last page of your handout, or take a moment and put it in the chat room. What are some measurable and observable skills that you would want to see in that classroom? I'll give you a minute to complete that. Get some things in the chat box. You seeing anything there, Christy?
Oh, I think that we're all like anticipating that one of us is going to be the first to volunteer to write something. So we're just all waiting for that. But if you would like that challenge to be that first person to put something in our chat box, what's the social skill that you think is important for that expectation that you wrote down and the routine that you identified? Remember, it has to be observable, measurable. Oh, I was hoping that that was somebody.
And
I'm not seeing anyone, but that's fine. And we'll just keep talking, which is great. So anytime you want to add, please let us. And there's the social skill. So let's move on, Barb.
I think this is the part too. There's a lot easier when you have the kids with you. They do this a lot easier than I think we do as adults. They're able to define what it is that they think would make them be successful. For my example, was coming into the classroom. So it's helpful.
We're entering the virtual classroom under safe. So if you're going to be safe, that's the expectation. When you're entering the virtual classroom, the microphone is on mute. So is that something that we could observe? Could we count that? So could we measure it? So of course we can. And that's the social skill. Microphone is on mute and camera is enabled. And so we're going to teach that. We're not just going to tell it. And as Barb said, we are going to talk about, or she's talked about, the student participation. But actually, as educators, we're going to come in first with what we want. The microphone is on mute, the camera is enabled, and then we'll ask our class, is there anything else that we need to do when we enter the virtual classroom to be safe? Because they're going to come back with things we can't even think about. It's their world, and they're probably far more efficient at using the virtual classroom, most likely.
And I think it's
Respect.
a good reminder there too that one place we might put that in safe, another place you might put that in respect. That really is irrelevant as long as it makes sense to the context of your school.
Yeah, and then of course for high school in that physical environment, the classroom, entering it and being safe, you're looking ahead, keeping your head, your hands to ourselves. Oh, but you can't do that in high school. They're just so social and physical. But anyway, and, and respecting others' personal
Yes, you
space.
can.
Okay,
Okay.
moving on.
So the other thing that we have to make sure that you're aware of is that we do have some research. And if you're not familiar with the Center for Adolescent Research in Schools, it's a great website for those of you that like to look at research, that like to implement things that are evidence-based for adolescents, for kids in high school. And part of the research that they did talked about the specific routines, some ones that we absolutely must consider in high school, highly recommended, not aside from the ones you want to create, but making sure you're looking at what is your agenda? What is today's work routine? What routine do you have around creating an agenda, a to-do list, that type of thing? Entering the classroom, that was a big one. How do you turn in assignments and how do you track assignments? So I think for most of us as high school educators, it's really a no-brainer. But it's nice to see that the research proved that those are really important for us to have routines around. And so if we have a routine, that means we have to teach it.
And some high schools operate as these are the non-negotiables, that we have to have those 4 things and then add things that are important for your personal classroom and your
So
students.
we're going to move into looking at our Zoom and moving into some breakout rooms during our Zoom. And this is where you're going to have the opportunity to be in rooms where you can unmute yourselves, talk to each other, and talk about what is that one high school behavioral expectation, one of those routines, those mandatory routines, and what would the social skill look like? So if you have integrity as yours, or you want to pick your next one, like my next one would be honoring self and others, I would go down to the next box and write honoring self and others. And I would pick one of those 4 non-negotiable routines. And what would I see in here? What would be the things that we would need to teach, that we would acknowledge, that we would expect kids to do with each other and with ourselves when we're in those rooms? So we're going to go to the breakout room. And right now we have about 100 people. So I'll probably put about 8 of you in a room together so that you can unmute and have a good conversation. We'll have about 15 minutes for this conversation. Make sure that as you are doing this, someone's writing in the chat room as well. What are some of the ideas you've come up with? Because this is very helpful for us as high school teachers to get this in the language and the context of what's appropriate in a high school classroom. So I'm going to create the breakout rooms.
And how many minutes do we have, Barb?
We will have, sorry, I'm making the breakout rooms. 11 rooms. Okay. We will have about 15 minutes for this conversation. I'm going to create the rooms. You'll get there, accept the invitation if you don't know how to do that already. Get in the room, unmute, have a conversation. About 1 minute left. There'll be a reminder letting you know that we're coming back together as a whole group. And we want to make sure that we've got captured all the chats from these different rooms as well.
Right.
So here we go, making the breakout rooms. You should be starting to get invitations. Again, when you get your invitation, be sure to accept and it'll pull you into that room and out of the main room. If you're still in the main room and you hear me, you can unmute yourself. Let me know who you are, and I'll see if I can find where you're supposed to be. I have a master list. Trisha, I see you haven't joined yet. You're supposed to be in room 8. If you want to go, unmute and let me know. Otherwise, I'll just leave you where you are. You're fine. But if you want to be part of the conversation. Nellie, the same thing. There's a room for you waiting. If you want to go, unmute, let me know. I've got Alexis, Mary Rodriguez, Nalida Rojas, and Ranjit. You've not been assigned a room, so if you would like to go to a room, please unmute and let me know. Otherwise, I'll just assign you and send you on your way to one of these rooms.
Hi, I was in room number 7 and it was not responding. I was there forever, so I just had to get out.
And who is that?
This is Rajneet Sahota.
Rajit. Okay, I think I just sent you another invitation to 8. Let me see.
Yes, I just received it. So
Okay, try that one.
this one? Okay,
All right, thanks.
thank you.
Uh-huh. Nalida? Are you in the main room? Would you like to be assigned? I don't see that you're muted, but I don't hear you either. If you find yourself still in the main room and you'd like to be assigned a room, please unmute, let me know, and I will slip you into one of the rooms. Otherwise, I don't want to do it without your permission because you may have decided not to join. I don't know what's going on out there. Welcome back. Just about everybody should be back with us, or at least it shows to me that all the breakout rooms have been closed. I hope you had a good conversation with each other. Feel free over the next 15 minutes to include any of the thoughts that you had or what you heard from each other while you were in your breakout rooms in the chat room. And mine is frozen, so I have to get out of it again, end the show, and come back. There we go. All right, so we're going to get started now with number 3 in our 8 things that we get out of using the classroom matrix for high school students. And this is about how do we apply this. Christy, are you back with us?
Yes, I got a little prompt that told me I was muted, so I like that. I love prompts. So we're going to go through these. We have 5 to go through in 15 minutes. So we're just going to kind of go through them. But again, the handout has far more information. The slides are just reminders of what these 8 powerful elements are for a classroom teaching matrix. So we defined what it is. We've set it up, why we're doing what we're doing. We've created the matrix, and we always have student voice to help us. And we might have non-negotiable procedures. We now need to say we have social skills, so how do we teach them? How do we apply the social skills that we have all agreed on? And it's not just that it's written on a chart, it's the idea that we need to go through what we know about learning. How do we get kids to generalize? Dr. Horner says, don't correct something if you haven't taught it. So go back and say, what does it mean to teach those social skills? And how do we do it so it's not separate? It's part of what we do in our classroom. So that's why it's under procedures. So for a specific procedure, we can always say, here it is. And I always use Webb's depth of knowledge to help me see how to teach those social skills. So kids can recall really easily. Well, entering the classroom, it's about, looking at being quiet, and we're respectful that way. But then we want to make sure that we have examples and non-examples so they can compare and contrast, right? So we look at skills and concepts. And then strategic thinking really goes back to having kids apply it differently. So if you had a procedure that wasn't on your teaching matrix, maybe you'd say, okay, now you guys are going to go into the breakout room. So what would it look like to be respectful in that breakout room? So you're giving them that opportunity to interact with each other and to be strategic thinkers. And then finally, that extended thinking part is the self-management part. If we can get our kids to reflect and maybe evaluate on a scale of 1 to 5 how they did in that breakout room for being respectful, we're extending their thinking for that social skill. So it's just not posting those social skills up on the wall in your matrix and go through it and nail them and teach it that first day. It's constantly giving that opportunity for them to build fluency. We want to make sure that we use the teaching matrix as a way, the language of the teaching matrix, I should say, Barbie, yeah, that's great, to be able to give specific performance feedback, acknowledge the behavior that you see, especially in high school. If we can let them know that we've seen you and we're letting you know that you were respectful in that breakout room. Somebody asked how you can monitor breakout rooms, so that's, we can just make assumptions like we're like magical people. We would use the same language that we created on our matrix. It's so much easier for us as teachers not to make something up in the moment. Oh my God, I got to acknowledge them. What do I say? Well, heck, we created that teaching matrix together. I can pull that language that we're all familiar with and let them know. And remember, whatever you feed will grow. So if you want them to enter quietly and be respectful and enter quietly, then make sure that that's the thing that you're going to acknowledge when you see it happen.
I think the breakout rooms definitely need to be taught the routine, but also will be a lot easier. We're not trying to do it for 1 or 200 or 300 people when you're actually doing it for your classroom size. And I have done it where we popped in and out and been able to hear what's going on and make conversations, and it works really easily, but you do have to play with it and get everybody on board with how to use it.
So right now, can I just say that, because some things are in the chat box about breakout rooms.
Right.
And you're right. Every school district, every high school is going to have their own kind of routines on their virtual learning. So yeah, some of you aren't even using breakout rooms, or it's difficult to monitor them. So just go back though, just in general, what's going on in that virtual classroom. Think of the procedure that we can actually teach social skills with right now with our kids. And then when we go back in the fall and we have a physical classroom.
Well, and really, that's what these 8 prompts are for you. And that's why you have the handout, is to think about whatever the context is that you have. How do you incorporate these 8 elements out of your teaching matrix to get the most out of what's going on and to make it as doable as possible for us as teachers, so that we can be doing a lot of teaching and not a lot of managing, particularly in high school, so the kids are involved. The 5th element is making sure that we're using prompts and pre-corrects. Again, a no-brainer, things that we've done forever, but just a reminder that as we move into the virtual classroom, we also want to do prompts and pre-corrects about what's in our matrix, what are we expecting kids to do. And again, that'll make sure that it's preventative, it's understandable and observable for the kids. It's very specific. We developed it together. We can even have the kids talk about what it is that they expect to be doing, and have them be prompting and pre-correcting each other in whatever method that we're using and reaching with the kids. So we don't want to forget that. And number 6, this is about responding to the challenging behavior. And I'm looking here on my notes for the responding. That was really on May 13th, if you want to go back and find that webinar. And again, it wasn't specific to high school, but it was all grade levels. And there's examples in that particular webinar going very specifically into those steps for how you respond. You want to make sure that you're following your continuum that is very proactive, it's instructive, and it's restorative. So instead of thinking about our response practices are punishing, our response practices, even in the virtual classroom, are going to be where we're setting up those proactive prompts and pre-corrects. We're instructing what it is that we want to see everybody do, and we're giving the chance to learn what we need to do and come back and be able to do it again. We want to make sure that we're empowering our kids. This is really about teaching their resiliency skills. How can they monitor themselves and each other? We want to make sure that whatever the behaviors are that we are teaching that are replacement behaviors, I might think about my own grandson, I'm working with him. He's been online a lot, but his online behavior before this has been very different than the classroom online behavior. So he's learning new behaviors. So we have to teach what those are and talk about what's appropriate online behavior compared to what he does in his gaming situations with all of his friends. And then that really helps promote that self-regulation for kids. So when we think about how we're going to respond to problems, just keep these in mind when you're setting up your responses.
I want to shout out to Brenda. Thanks for offering your support and your email. Wow, there's 89 people on the webinar. I think they're going to all like email you. But Brenda said something, and I love that she said, I am no means an expert, right? But I had to learn by fire. And we all are. And
Yeah.
that's part of when we were talking about the learning walk. How do we learn from each other? And right now, Brenda's our like go-to. So thanks, Brenda. Self-monitoring is the piece that we want our kids to get to. We want to go back to say, gosh, it's not us always telling kids, look at, you're being respectful when you enter the classroom because your hands were to yourself, or whatever that is that you put in your matrix. We want our kids to be able to guide themselves in their own social behavior and actually be the catalyst for others. So we know about the social emotional learning. We know that self-awareness and self-recognition really happens first, or self-management. We need to be able to have opportunities to teach that. When we have social awareness and relationship skills opportunities, we can build upon ourselves. But the final piece is where we want our kids to be in high school, and that's responsible decision making. And so we can't get there if we haven't guided them to be self-managers. Use that teaching matrix to help develop their awareness, their own self-management, their social responsibility with relationship skills, and then they become this responsible decision maker.
So in your
So
hand,
there's another webinar that we've done on that, but we got to keep going, Barb, because we only have
I know.
6 more minutes.
Right.
So
Your handout
sorry.
has definitions of these. This isn't something high school is always focused on while we do it all the time with our kids. So that'll give you some more information.
And then the last is alignment. We want to be able to take all those things that have been thrown to us and not just throw them up in the air and say we can't do everything. I teach chemistry, and now you're expecting me to do restorative practices and bully prevention and all sort of SEL. The idea is the matrix can consolidate all of the social skills that our kids need to be these global citizens that we're hoping them to walk out our door for graduation and enter the world. Um, so an example in that teaching matrix, if we're going to do some SEL or social emotional wellness in our classroom, we don't have to do it separate, but what we can do is in our classroom, when you guys are feeling upset, here's how you can be responsible and see what the social skill is. Here's how you can be respectful. Here's how you can be safe. I've provided that as an instructor, but I'd love for you to add to that. And that's when you would get students, their perception of what it would be when they're feeling upset.
And I've done this in classrooms, and it looks really different in a freshman class as it does to one of the classes with the seniors, but equally important, and the kids got equally involved in the conversation. It wasn't something we could assume they figured out how to do just because they were seniors. So it was one of the great routines to cover with the kids.
And Tricia said it's to tie. This is a great example. So that's how we want you to align. That's number 8. This is what makes it powerful. And Trish said something about hang on, because I lost your little chat. Social agreements. You could tie this in with social agreements. Yes. And we're going to give you some more examples on alignment because that's our last step before we close the webinar.
And so the other thing you want to think about is college and career readiness. And those are the 4 categories of college and career readiness. You've got all of the behavioral expectations we expect to see in each one of those. How do you include that in your matrix as well? So here's an example of one where you've got your expectations, respect, responsibility, informed, ready to succeed at one of our schools. And then in their cafeteria hallway and the bus, we would be creating routines now about however we're doing our distance learning routines. And then we would write examples, pull from this list and put those into and operationalize what would that look like into your matrix. And then you've integrated college and career readiness into your matrix as well. We don't need to create something different or something new.
We could also take the work with restorative practices. If we have classroom circles, instead of just writing rules on the board, what we can do is take our school-wide expectations and align it with the procedure of classroom circles. So for each one of the rules you have, you could just fit it into integrity, honor self and others, social responsibility. And remember the important thing, everyone has an equal voice in the creation of expectations and procedures. And that's what they say in the restorative practice work. And that's the work we're doing with positive behavioral supports. We want to also look at how we can align the cultural responsiveness work. Here's just a nice example. The link is actually on the PowerPoint, but you can get it from PBIS.org. And it's really about equity and looking at how you can be with your school expectations. This is just an example of being safe, respectful, and responsible. What it would look like at school in general, right? Come to an agreement with your kids, but then have them take it home and talk with their parents. We really want that partnership with our family to know what kids are doing at school, be aligned with the social skills and expectations, but at school it might look differently. So what a great conversation. And then most important for our kids, most of their time is in the neighborhood socializing, and it may look totally different from the school or the home. So it's just a nice like takeaway. And I think during this virtual time, what a great assignment to get kids together in groups and have them talk about the similarities and differences of your school-wide expectations in their neighborhood or at home right now.
So we're coming to the end, and we would like to remind you of our evaluation. And it's there. You can see the URL. Give us some feedback so we can always improve on these. Remember, again, these aren't trainings. We're basically giving you some insights and some resources to make it through this time, the opportunity to talk with each other. And just to let you know, these daily webinars are going to end at the end of May. And we will be returning and going back to trainings, and those trainings will happen with your local regional technical assistance centers and then the California Technical Assistance Center. So we will be moving away from these resource types of responses and moving into back into real trainings. And I think most of the technical assistance centers are working with their school districts in developing a hybrid, so that it's going to be a combination of in-person and online. So they will continue. And just a reminder too, many of you have attended our high school symposium. This year we're going to go virtual with it, and it's going to be a webinar series. So watch for your emails. They'll be talking about the high school PBIS symposium, and we're going to have 3 different series, 3 different keynotes, opportunities for 3 choices of breakout sessions at each one of those that will be current with that time of the year, what's happening, say in February, what do we need to know? In January, where are we at, and what are we needing to be doing in March? So we'll be working with the national partners to bring you the most up-to-date information. Watch for those webinars. And again, when you attend those, you'll have access to the recordings. So there's something that you'll be able to use throughout the year.
I've just added 3 links, and those will be the slides for the evaluation. And then we're going to talk about California PBIS conference. And then finally, the new community cares, which is our version of the recognition system this year. So those links are there for you. If you would like this PowerPoint in a PowerPoint style, as opposed to PDF, please remember to email Barb and I, because we weren't going to really go back to the chat box if you requested it there.
So there are emails are on the bottom of this final thank you slide, which is where we're at. And if you want this as PowerPoint, otherwise up in the website, it's just a PDF PowerPoint, and that's for specific access purposes. But if you want the real PowerPoint, feel free to either let one of us know and we will send it to you via email. So we want to thank you for participating today and for writing in the chat box. Again, if you want to keep some of the chats that you heard, just go over to the right-hand corner of your chat box and you'll see the 3 little dots. Click on it, and I think it'll say save, and you'll be able to save it. We're also going to save the chats ourselves and kind of filter out some of the extraneous and just put those chats that we think are really relevant. And you'll find that in the folder. Give us a couple of days, maybe a week to get those, because we have to transcribe them. And we'll put the chats there for you. So again, thanks so much for joining us today. Take advantage of the high school symposium when it comes up. We're thinking probably the first one will be in November, but we're really in those planning stages of working with the National Center in order to respond to your needs.
And you are so awesome. And our butterflies really symbol how awesome you are. That's our transformation of a prevention model, if you haven't gathered that with the color shades. And of course, we're all involved with that, but you in particular, having those opportunities to work with kids right now in this new environment and when you go back in the fall. So
I thought I would get out of the PowerPoint so that we can have the opportunity to see some of the people that have been in the chat box. If you want to unhide yourself and wave to everybody, to all your fellow high school people that are out there trying to keep this going. Hats off to all of you. I think it's amazing the work that you're doing. with our kids in California and maybe in other states as well. It depends on who's all joined us. So thanks everybody for joining us and keeping the work up. Oh, I see Omar's got a baby with them. Love seeing the children. I miss the kids. I'm sure. Oh, hi. I'm sure you all are missing the kids. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.
Bye, everybody.